On this season of the Keep Growing podcast, we're digging for victory. Here's your host, John Morgan.
This week we have a special guest. As you know, we're focusing this entire season on victory gardening. Well, who better to reach out to than the organization that literally wrote the book on victory gardens, the National Garden Bureau. A couple weeks ago, I had the opportunity to interview Diane Blazek, who is the Executive Director of the National Garden Bureau. Let's jump right into the interview. Alright, so I'm here today with Diane Blazek, and she is the Executive Director for the National Garden Bureau. So first off, would you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. I think the thing that I'm most proud of with my background is that I grew up on a farm in north central Missouri. So my dad farmed about 500 acres, and we were kind of the basic farm, that was around in the 60s and 70s: corn, wheat, soybeans, cows, pigs. I can't say horses. I had a mule that my dad convinced me would be easy to ride that wasn't. Chickens, etc. So, along with the farm, we had a vegetable garden. So I spent many a summer hours weeding the garden, harvesting the tomatoes, and we canned them, and the carrots, and the peas, and the beans. You name it, I think we grew it, and that was just how I got my start. And then in early adulthood, I what was I doing then? Oh, I was selling greeting cards and wanted a change of pace, and so I saw an ad for a trade magazine. They needed a sales rep, an advertising sales rep, and lo and behold, it was Ball Publishing, and so I got my start in 1993 with Grower Talks magazine, and stayed there for 15 years. Took a quick little leap over and landed here at National Garden Bureau and All America Selections.
Okay, so National Garden Bureau, do you want to tell us a little bit about it? I know this year is really special for the National Garden Bureau.
Yes, it is. We are very proudly celebrating our 100th anniversary. So it's a big deal for a small nonprofit like this to celebrate. And as it just so happened that our founder, James Henderson Burdett, he was very involved with victory gardens in World War One. And then between the two world wars is when he founded National Garden Bureau. So it was 1920. And then when we got involved with the Second World War, he decided to write a book to help home gardeners, figure out how to grow more of their own vegetables. So he wrote the Victory Garden Manual in 1943 while he was running National Garden Bureau. So all in all, his concept was just, let's make the homeowner more successful. Let's teach them how to grow their own food, which is what he did with the Victory Garden Manual. And then over the years, he incorporated ornamentals with it. And that is still what we're doing today, is we're inspiring and educating people to be more successful gardeners.
All right, so yeah, you guys literally wrote the manual on victory gardening. And this season on our podcast, we're focusing entirely on victory gardens. And on your website, it's ngb.org, right?
Yes, perfect. It's one of the simplest URLs, I think. There's only 3 letters that, is basically the acronym for our organization. Yeah, ngb.org.
So if folks head over there right now, you guys have taken Victory Gardens and released Victory Garden 2.0.
Absolutely, we did. Yeah, we're presenting it as a series of blogs. So the blogs is found under the inspiration tab on our website, which makes sense. But we also have links on the front page of it. And right now we have 5 blogs in the series. So the very first one we did was about planning, and we'll come back to that one because I think it's very interesting how he wrote the book. And then it's on planting, and then we added some options for planting a victory garden in containers, or in raised beds. And then we have a member who literally wrote the book on pollinator victory gardening. So that was one of the 5 blog posts. And trust me, we have some additional ones coming up in the future. We'll probably be continuing this all summer, if not into the fall.
Yeah, that's great because traditional victory gardens, it's a plot of land, straight rows. A lot of people don't have the space to do that nowadays, and other gardening methods like container gardens, raised beds. Person that we had on the podcast last year, Joel Karsten, with straw bale gardening. These are all great options for victory gardens, so it doesn't have to fall into that kind of classic straight row format. You can really take it and go any sort of direction with it.
You're exactly right. And we wanted to make sure that people were aware of that because, yeah, I think victory gardens do have that stereotype of here is a square backyard from the 1940s, and here's a little picket fence, and you're going to plant all these rows north to south or east to west. And so we wanted to make sure, because we're so much about inspiration, is you can do it in whatever way you can. If it's on a 40-story high rise and you want one tomato plant, okay, here's how to do it in a container. Or if you want to put a raised bed on your patio because you don't have any in-ground space, then that's an option also. So really, it's just I like to say, and I'm not going to use any names, but there's that athletic brand that has that swoosh. So I like to say with gardening, just do it.
Yeah, it's more of a philosophy than anything. It's just getting out there, getting your hands dirty, and the satisfaction of a homegrown tomato. There's no substitute for the flavor of a homegrown tomato.
Oh, you are so right. Yeah, growing up on a farm, to me, I know what a tomato fresh off the vine tastes like. And if you've only had tomatoes from the store, it's just a whole different experience.
Yeah, I always like to say that store-bought tomatoes are just the idea of a tomato.
Yeah, yeah.
What advice would you have for gardeners that are just starting out?
So I referenced the planning part of the Victory Garden manual, and now I am not exactly somebody who plans when I'm gardening. I'm very spontaneous. And so as I was reading this manual, it kind of struck me over the head that wow, if I did better planning, this would be all part of it. And so we were kind of sorting through all of his tips, and I think today this is even more important than it was back then. But knowing your growing zone, knowing your last frost date, because I mentioned earlier, we want the home gardener to be successful. And I'm here in Chicago, and it's what, the end of April. We've been seeing things in the marketplace, and this year might have been a little odd with the COVID virus, but so often we'll see tomato plants way too early to plant. So we want the home gardener to know, if you put a pepper in the ground April 1st just because you had a nice warm 70-degree day, you're not going to be successful. So we want to educate them. So we're saying, make sure you research your last frost date, make sure you know your growing zone so that you know the right time to plant for your region. We want you to be successful.
Yeah, I know knowing the last frost date is really important. And here in our area, we've had kind of a late spring. I mean, we've had frosts later than normal and really hard freezes later than normal. I put out cabbage plants a few weeks ago, and I was sure that they had been completely killed by a freeze that we had. I just left them in the ground for a couple weeks, and I went out to the garden yesterday, or well, day before yesterday, before I started mowing grass, and I don't know how they did it, but they pulled through and they're greening up. So we've got
Well,
some
yeah, you must
magic
have had some
cabbage
really,
plants.
yeah, some cold hardy cabbages. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
great.
So with planning, folks want to think about what they eat regularly also. I always tell people, it's great to plant zucchini or something like that, but if you don't really eat it normally, there's no sense in really planting a bunch of it because you're always going to end up with a million zucchini anyway. So I think that
Yeah.
comes into a big part of the planning too, is what your family eats and then focusing on that.
Oh, absolutely. We made that point number 2
Mm-hmm.
is yeah, like just because a zucchini may be pretty easy to grow and will be prolific, if you hate it, then don't grow it. Use the space for what you want to eat. And the other thing that I talk about too is kind of, I call it high value gardening. So if you have limited space and you're okay buying green peppers from the store because they taste great, but what if you want a unique capsicum baccatum pepper or a different colored tomato and you don't want to pay $6 a pound at the market for it? So maybe you want to grow some of the more unusual things so that the traditional you can go ahead and buy at the store for 99 cents a pound, but the unique things you might want to grow yourself. So think of high value gardening and what will your family eat. And then in that same vein, let's say you have a ton of space. Do you really want to use all of it? Are you going to be able to preserve it if you have excess, or give it away, donate it? Especially this year, maybe you want to donate it to a local food bank or something. But yeah, all of that goes into place. Yeah, I've been stuck with way too many tomatoes and way too little basil before. So now I kind of know how much we use. So
Mm-hmm.
some of it is experience and practice, but others is just let's think it through a little.
Yeah, that's another thing, especially with beginning gardeners. I think too often they start off with, kind of the high hopes of spring, and then by the middle of the season, maybe they've had a few plants that died or different things like that. And it's kind of easy to get discouraged, but gardening is one of those things that you kind of have to learn by trial and error. And a whole lot of error sometimes.
Yeah, I like to say that, especially to a new gardener or a non gardener, I'm like, trust us. Those of us that have been doing it for a while, we have killed more plants than you will ever dream about growing. So don't worry about it. Yeah, you might kill them, you might forget to water them, but that's okay. That's part of the learning process, trial and error.
Hmm. Yeah, I had a person, I was back in the wintertime, they contacted me about an orchid that they were trying to grow, and it was a relative, so I was a little bit more comical with them in my response, but they were like, how do I take care of this? And I'm like, well, to truly master orchids, you have to kill at least 10.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
um, After planning comes planting, and you mentioned knowing your zone. And for folks that don't know, what is a hardiness zone, and how can they find out that information?
Well, we did put a couple links in our
Yeah.
blog, so that's the easiest way. But the USDA has a growing zone, a hardiness zone map that you can find it. I know a lot of our members, some of the seed companies, they have links on their websites also. So it's pretty easy. If you just go online and Google that, you're probably going to hear things like zone 5, zone 6, zone 6A, 6B. So basically, what that means is how cold does it get during the winter? So that's important, like if you're planting perennials. And then combining that with the last frost date, you're going to know what the average last frost date is so that you know when to start planting things. And by reading up and figuring out what you're going to plant, you're going to know, okay, well, there's something like peas that maybe I can plant earlier when the ground is cooler. For things that love heat, tomatoes and peppers, you want to wait not only until after the last frost date has passed, but wait for that soil temperature to warm up a little bit. And we talk about that with container gardening and raised bed gardening. Your soil is going to warm up faster in a container or a raised bed than it is in ground. So, all of these things play a part in determining exactly when the best time is for you to plant in your local zone, local area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a great thing with container gardening too is depending on the size of the container, you can always move it inside during a frost. I know I had a person that contacted me a few weeks ago, and they were growing sunflowers in containers. Originally, they didn't tell me that they were in containers, and they said, "Oh, well, I'm in Massachusetts," and I was like, "Oh no." But after talking to them for a little bit, they said they were in containers. And I was like, "Oh, great! Just take them inside when you know it's going to frost or freeze."
Exactly. Yeah, I'm doing that right now with all my little seedlings.
Mm-hmm.
I have a screened-in porch, and so I put them out there. And but I'm still watching because yeah, we're definitely still getting frost around here. So I have to bring them in sometimes, or otherwise just kind of let them chill overnight. And speaking of seedlings, that's another thing that I think for new gardeners. Somebody had asked me the other day, okay, so if somebody wants to get started growing, they've never done anything before, what do you recommend? And I think that herbs are some of the easiest thing to start with. And think about it, you go to your local garden center and you're probably going to have what, a choice of like 12 different herbs, and then even there you're going to have different types of basil, different types of thyme, etc. And so, especially with a container, and if somebody likes to cook, then absolutely, go buy a couple herbs. You can make a combination planter with maybe two or three different herbs as long as the pot's big enough. And that's probably the easiest way to get started. Growers like you guys make it so easy because you provide a wonderful assortment of transplants. So that's my recommendation for the newbie.
Yeah, for me, I always do a combination of, and it's one of those, again, sort of an experience thing that I know what I can start easily from seed, and I know what I have trouble with. Like, I can never get tomatoes started from seed to do well. I either end up with dampening off or issues like that. So I always buy tomato starts. But something like Swiss chard, it's super easy just to sow it directly in the ground and then just thin it out later and go from there. So, yeah, a part of it is just knowing, kind of from experience, what grows well from starts and what doesn't.
Yeah, exactly. And we put some links like that on our website too. There's traditionally some that should be direct sown. Then you have the ones that are optional, and then of course it depends on how far north you are, how long your growing season is. For me, in zone 5, if I just put a tomato seed in the ground in June 1st, well, I'm probably not going to get too many tomatoes out of it. So yeah, and I like to tell people, there's a lot of resources. Ask at your local garden center, go to your local extension office. Of course, I'll recommend that people go to our website because we link to a lot of our members that have great information. But yeah, it is again a trial and error, and you have to decide: am I going to buy plant trans? Am I going to start seed indoors and then transplant them, or am I going to do direct sow with some of the things? Yeah, so thankfully we've got a lot of good information out there for us to follow.
Another thing, I'd mentioned cabbage earlier, but another thing is planning for succession in the garden. So throughout the year, once a crop dies back, if it's an early cool season crop like leaf lettuce or something like that, and it bolts, uh, you can always replace that with another crop. And that's especially great if you have limited space.
Yeah, exactly. I think my favorite experience story on that is cilantro. So I planted a bunch of cilantro. not realizing how quickly it bolted. Well, I think I had like 10 plants. Well, there's no way I could use that much cilantro. And so then I figured out, okay, maybe I'll plant seed like every 2 weeks or so, and then I'll have a good harvest available, a small amount throughout the summer instead of all at once that bolted because I couldn't get to it.
Yeah, I have an herb garden in my kitchen window, and I was surprised that cilantro, it even bolted inside.
Oh, yeah.
Like, in my window, I walk in one morning and my cilantro is blooming.
Well, luckily we've got breeders working on that. They're going to continue to work on a very slow bolting cilantro so that we're more successful.
Yeah. For the National Garden Bureau, we'd mentioned the website. You guys are on social media too, right?
Yes, we are. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. Is there anything out there that I'm missing? Those are the 4 main ones that we're on.
Okay. If people want to get in touch, do you have like a email address where they could submit questions, or do you recommend through social media? Or
I would probably recommend through social media.
Okay.
We have an info@ngb.org is one of the emails. But since you bring that up, last week we started a new series called Ask the Experts. So we're putting it on Facebook and Instagram, and it's wonderful because some of our members are the actual breeding companies. So we're having tomato and pepper breeders thus far. Last week was tomatoes, this week is peppers. And as people ask questions, we're getting the answers for those and we post them online. And then we're going to repurpose all these Q&As and put them on our website as blogs and in our FAQ section. So that's when I said, hey, we have a lot more coming with the Victory Garden. So we're going to have a whole series of successful Victory Garden with tomatoes, successful Victory Garden with peppers, etc. throughout the summer. So yeah, all that will be in our blogs, on our social media, in our FAQs.
All right. Well, I want to thank you for joining us today. And the website is ngb.org, and there folks can find out about Victory Gardening 2.0. Again, I want to thank Diane for the opportunity to talk to her about the National Garden Bureau and Victory Gardening 2.0. Something that she talked about was planning. Planning is perhaps one of the most important parts of gardening. During the cold winter months, we sat inside with a pile of seed catalogs and plan for warmer days. If you're just getting started, consider what your family likes to eat and go from there. In my days as a teacher, a common saying you would always hear is that a failure to plan is a plan to fail. Now is the time to plan your work and work your plan. Next time we're going to get growing. Starting your garden and nursing it through the first few weeks is perhaps one of the hardest aspects of gardening, and it's also where a bit of patience starts to come in. I think every gardener has accidentally cut down a seedling that they mistook for a weed at some point. I know I have. We'll look at some common veggie garden plants and how to start them in the next episode. In the meantime, head over to our show notes at bobsmarket.com/keepgrowing. Also, I need your help with an upcoming episode. If you have a gardening question, leave me a voice message at anchor.fm/keepgrowing. I plan on working in a call-in episode in the future to help you personally troubleshoot your gardening issues. And of course, to help you keep growing.
Submit your gardening questions at bobsmarket.com/keepgrowing. The Keep Growing podcast is produced by John Morgan. Copyright 2020 Bob's Market and Greenhouses Incorporated.